Welcome to ND and Me, a podcast to share NDers' lived experiences. I'm Richard, an ND coach, mentor, accountability buddy, and business consultant. Morning, Helen. Tell us who Helen is.
Oh, hi, Richard. Well, how long have you got? I'm 59 now, so there's a lot to say, but obviously relevant to this interview because it's ADHD Awareness Month, and I've been diagnosed with ADHD this year, which is rather late. Obviously, a lot more people are being diagnosed now, but even most of them are still a lot younger than me. So it's been an interesting journey. And I'm a coach, a meditation teacher, and I have been for a long time, but I can see how the way I meditate, the way I coach is obviously all geared up to ADHD because I've developed so many strategies myself over the years, and getting to know myself by meditating as well. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. What led you into seeking a diagnosis?
Right. Well, it was just over a year ago. And I was quite literally just praying for answers because I'm thinking, why is it that, you know, my, oh, we can be a bit black and white sometimes. And I think, oh, my whole life has been a failure. But there were times, obviously, where I have had success, but it's never been consistent. And I'm thinking, well, why, at my stage in my life, and I saw on Facebook yesterday, another of my old school friends has retired and people are now retiring. And I'm thinking, well, how come I've never had a successful career consistently, despite, being in all the top sets at school? I went to grammar school, very bright. And so I just prayed for answers, and this little voice in my head just said ADHD. And I thought, what? And then I saw something on Facebook. A friend of mine had shared a link to Gabor Mate's book, Scattered Minds. So I read that over the weekend, thanks ADHD Hyperfocus. And then I read I think 3 more books all in a week. And suddenly everything made sense. I thought, okay, this is why things have been hard, to get motivated or having lots of ideas and then getting overwhelmed and not being able to follow through on them all. Because I think, probably same for a lot of other people with ADHD, you get lots of ideas. I used to be a teacher, and I was talking about, well-being and mental health a long time before it sort of became more mainstream. And because I could see, you can kind of see the solutions, but then it's like, how do I get there, kind of thing. And then understanding more about how my brain worked, which I can't really explain myself, but then I just contacted my doctors, and luckily around where I live, they take mental health very seriously, and I got a diagnosis within a few months. And because a few years previously, it was just before the first pandemic, actually, I'd been going through a difficult time, family stuff as well. But and at that point, I thought I might have bipolar. And then now I realise that a lot of people are misdiagnosed with that because of the mood swings. You can be sort of like really energetic one day, then the next day have no energy at all.
Yeah, and the impulsivity and
Oh, yeah. Yes. Well, that as well, because it was like, how can I be at my age? I mean, okay, it's not good to compare yourself to others, but it's like where I thought I would be, but it's probably the same true for most people. It's like, oh, I'll be settled, I'd own my own home, and here I am renting because I used to own a house, and then that was kind of like all part of the grieving process, because I think, well, if I'd known I had ADHD back then, maybe I would still own a house, but there's no point in worrying about it because that's in the past and you can't change that.
yeah, it's really quite telling. Well, for me anyway, looking back at previous loss and seeing whether or not the diagnosis had anything to do with the loss.
Yes.
And my way of putting it in a box or dealing with it, depending on which of my counselors you talk to, is that rationalization, is to say, it's done, it's in the past, there's nothing we can do about it, but at least I know why it happened.
Yes.
Because just that the uncertainty of the unknown is probably just as damaging as worrying about it. So one of the questions that I ask lots of the people on the podcast is, how has neurodiversity affected you and your life? And you've touched on a little bit there.
Yes.
But if you want to talk a little bit more about any of it, then now's the opportunity to you.
Well, yeah, I can see how it has affected me. And what was crazy is I used to be a teacher, and I realised how little I knew about ADHD, although, I taught kids who had it. And, you just think of the stereotypical thing about hyperactive boys. And, when I was at school, I was quite chatty. I went to primary school was fine, actually, because I was, baby boy, but I am baby boomer. So we had like 40 children in our class in primary school. So there was always a lot going on. And I think probably it gave me enough stimulation from that, as well as the work. But then when I went to secondary school, I went to a grammar school, which was all girls. It was a church school. Most of the teachers, who at the time I thought were very old, but were probably about the age I am now. And it was quite strict, sit still, and it's boring. So it was, and I was quite small as well. So I became the class clown, so I wouldn't get beaten up, basically. I'll make them laugh, and then they'll leave me alone. And but also I can see how that was partly also because of the ADHD. I wanted more stimulation for my brain. And a friend of mine and me, we had the distinction of a teacher told us we were the first girl she'd ever had to separate in class when we were in the sixth form, because normally by the time you get to the sixth form you've kind of settled down a bit. And then with my A levels, I think I probably could have got better grades than I did, but I should have probably been a straight A student. I got a B for maths because my dad helped me. And then I went to university, and then it was just like, oh, here we go. We can go out and have fun. Nobody's going to give me a detention if I don't hand in my assignments. And my parents aren't here to tell me what time to come home. And I can go, I just turned 18. My birthday's in July, so I was the young one in the year. And I was just like, I just wanted to go out and get drunk and meet boys, rather than do the assignments. Yeah, I was seeing other people were managing to do both. So, I dropped out after a year because, I didn't pass my exams. And then I did go back in my 30s to do my teaching degree. And I struggled with that, with the planning lessons. So I can see that was another thing with ADHD. And I managed to get through my teaching degree, but because I was going through a difficult divorce at the time, it was doing the dissertation was the thing that I struggled with. I could, rock up in the classroom and teach, but to explain how I did it and plan my lessons, I could know what the outcome was or what I was teaching them, but then it was like breaking it down, which I struggled with. And then I left full-time teaching after 3 years because I couldn't face another year of going around the same curriculum. And again, I suppose it was that variety my brain was seeking, and I had another business. And then I went back and did supply teaching on and off for quite a few years. And I enjoyed that because of the variety and because I didn't have to plan lessons. And I could be, and I think the way our brains are wired, we're very good at like being in the moment and picking up on what's needed. So, and then also, you know, you've probably heard about the spoons theory, that we have a limited amount of capacity for what we can do in a day. And I think, so at least when I was doing that at 3 o'clock, I'm finished, I can go home, I'm done for the day, I don't have to do meetings or parents' evenings or anything like that. So, and then, but now, working for myself, I much prefer that. I think, you know, we're much more likely to be entrepreneurs. I always struggled, you know, in my early career, I did bookkeeping and accounts. I'd learn how to do a job, then I'd get bored, and it's like, oh, I need to get another job now. So it's that needing that variety, but also the structure as well. So I've just taken on a VA I'm going to be working with, who's going to help me with the organizational side of things. And I had that kind of sort of almost aha moment, I suppose, a couple of weeks ago. And I'm thinking, well, just because I struggle with planning, organization, following through on things, it doesn't mean I'm not a brilliant coach and meditation teacher. And I think a lot of it, the problems you can see as well, like last week I was on a retreat, I was cooking, and when there's other people around and I just know what I'm doing, I have to cook, I don't have to worry about anything else. It's like when you've got to do everything, it's like when you've got the support, you know, community around you, and everybody can do their bit, what to play to their strengths. And we don't all have to be good at everything, but I think now we're very insular. I mean, I live on my own now, my kids are all grown up, so I have to do everything. I have to make sure that I earn enough to pay the bills, I have to do the cleaning, the gardening, the shopping and everything. And really, I suppose we're not wired for that anyway. I think as humans, we're social animals, we're meant to be in communities and supporting each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I watched a really interesting old YouTube video series called Wired for the Stone Age, and you know, looking at the social anthropology of the fact that our bodies haven't evolved as quickly as our lived environment has evolved. So yeah, it's quite telling when you then end up doing things that you would normally share in a community, rather than having, you know, 15, 20, 30, 50 people sharing those responsibilities. So, you know, when you're unwell one day, you know that you're going to get fed because there's somebody else in the community who's going to bring you food.
Yes.
Well, now there's so many people who live alone without any real support, which isn't how we were designed.
No.
So to talk to me about your meditation journey, and then off the back of that, the benefits of that and interacting with ADHD.
Okay. Yeah. Well, as I said, I was a full-time teacher for 3 years, and I left to set up a business because while I was at the end of my first year of teaching, after I qualified, I was diagnosed with celiac disease. And I say I got all our family's weird genes. They gave them all to me, you know, you can have everything. And so, and at that time, there wasn't as much available. It was much harder to eat out. There wasn't much in the supermarkets. You could get more stuff on prescription at that time, though. And with the charity Celiac UK, they were organising like a campaign each year for Awareness Week. They do something, and that it was about eating out. And I thought, well, this is all very well, saying you want restaurants, hotels, or whatever to cater for gluten-free and celiacs, but where are they going to buy their food from? And I asked them, most of them were just buying it in the supermarkets because there weren't any specialist suppliers. So I got the idea of setting up a business to supply gluten-free food, which I did. But as the supermarket started stocking more stuff. I couldn't compete on price, and then I was importing stuff from Europe, and then in 2008 when the thing crashed. But anyway, through that business, I used to go to networking events, and I met a couple who they ran spiritual tours. They used to go to the pyramids, Glastonbury, things like that. And they ran a taster evening doing some meditation and chanting and dancing and movement. And the next morning, I just felt so calm. It's like, oh, I need to find out more about this. And so I was out shopping one day, and by the till, there was a little flyer saying meditation classes starting next Thursday. My kids were at Scouts. It was just around the corner from their Scout hut. So it was like the universe was like giving me this. And so it was a Buddhist group. And I suppose because, this was 2006, I think, and we didn't have apps and YouTube. We might have had YouTube, but it wasn't like, there weren't all guided meditations online and things like that then. So, and I was going through a difficult time with my oldest son as well. He just started drinking heavily and he was doing drugs. And I think there was something in me that kept going, because a lot of people, they'll think if something challenging happens in their life, they think, well, I can't go to meditation class. And actually, that's when you need to go. And there was something I knew this would help. And then, so yeah, I kept going. And then I went on my first retreat a couple of years later. And a couple of years after that, they said they were looking. I was there one weekend, and they said, oh, we're looking for someone to come and cook next weekend. And I said, well, I love cooking, I'll do that. And so that was 11 years ago, I think. So I've been going back and volunteering at the retreat centre and cooking on retreats. So I've learned, I've met lots of different teachers, and I sort of just learned from them. And then once, I suppose, after about 10 years or so, with my local group, and I started to lead meditations in our group, and people were giving me like really good feedback. I'm thinking, oh, I'm actually quite good at this. and I enjoy it as well. It's like it's important for us with ADHD as well, that we will do things. It doesn't feel like any effort to get up and record meditations for my YouTube channel. I was running some classes locally, but because of the energy prices, it wasn't viable for them to let me use the cafe where I was doing them. But and in terms of the ADHD, I obviously didn't know at that time I had ADHD. And what's interesting, I think I saw 2 separate posts on LinkedIn yesterday, and it's something I need to address. Another misconception: oh, meditation is harder for people with ADHD. Well, you can believe whatever you want, but everybody's mind is unique, and it's not about trying to change it or anything. It's about working with your mind. And I was on one retreat, and the guy leading it had been, he's a Buddhist order member, and he'd been practicing the order for maybe 25 years. And he said that his thoughts still race, so maybe he's got ADHD. And I thought, oh, okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that your thoughts go away or they stop, but you're just not trying to change it. It's like accepting it and working with it rather than against it and thinking it's bad or it's wrong. And it's just what it is. And thoughts are just thoughts. They're not real, and they just come and go. And if you let them, and sometimes my mind does settle when I meditate. And this thing, oh, well, we can't sit still. Well, we can. It's just again, it's a practice. It gets easier with time, because it doesn't mean that when I'm sitting meditating that I don't want to move, that I'm not getting the impulses, but I just don't act on them. So you become more detached from it, so you can see what's going on, but you don't have to get caught up in it. And I think that's why and not just for people with ADHD, for anybody, because most people are going around living their lives on autopilot and just acting unconsciously, because, you know, with the Buddhist teaching, it's all about our conditioning, about that's how we respond to things, because we've always responded in that way. So it's about being able to take that step back and be in the gap before you act. And then, like you were saying before about, you know, with the impulsivity, then you can see that impulsivity and recognize it for what it is, and then saying, okay, I'm feeling that impulse, but I have a choice. I don't have to do that. And I think that's the problem, you know, with humans. We like to create this persona, and then this ADHD thing, it can, like, we can become so identified with it and think that's who we are, but it's not. And so and realizing that, it's quite liberating as well, that I don't have to act on my thoughts. I don't have to believe them. They might go away, they might change, but they might not. But they're just thoughts at the end of the day. And I have a choice whether I'm going to let them have power over me or not.
The thing that I struggle most with in that thought process, in and around conscious ability, mindfulness, and conscious decision making, is looking at that from the angle of stress states, because, you know, polyvagal theory, the limbic system, my base state is stressed. So I'm more likely to be reactionary or impulsive, depending on who you're speaking with, driven by those emotions, because I'm too stressed to be thoughtful. Well, at least that's the rationalization that I've given that context. Yeah, I find it really, really, really hard to be mindful. And actually, there's a level of dopamine and adrenaline that I get from thinking on my feet, that I enjoy's the wrong word, that I'm glad I have. But yeah, I've worked with, you know, a number of fantastic facilitators and coaches and counselors who've held my hand down the garden path of mindfulness and meditation. And yeah, when somebody says people with ADHD might struggle more with that, I can see and feel that. But again, you're completely right that every single one of us is an individual. And again, it comes back to that, you know, hyper focus or specialist subject thought, that actually I'm you know, you're a really spiritual person, and serendipitously you landed on meditation. So you've done it, you've enjoyed it, and then you've fed that feedback loop to say, well, I tried a thing, it went good, and now it's landed in my lap that it's around the corner during Scouts.
Yeah.
And then you, in a way, that's become a special interest of yours because of how it all fell together. So yeah, whilst sitting still, I am the graceful swan. You know, my knees are doing this because I can't sit still. I've never been able to sit still, you know. And if it's you know, playing with my USB stick, which works a bit like one of those Japanese rubbing stones because it's smooth, then I can sit here and like sit still. But it's definitely quieter than a clicky pen.
Yeah. But, and I think, again, it's practice, because it's like, yeah, at the beginning, maybe you need to do that. And then as you become more kind of detached from that need to do that, you can look at, okay, you can just observe the thought that's wanting to do that, and then get curious. Because I mean, I think having ADHD for meditating is a huge advantage because our minds are so interesting. So it's fascinating, and it's like, and sometimes, you know, it's and also about not taking it too seriously. And sometimes I just laugh. I think, well, where did that come from? It's quite funny sometimes, where it comes from, because yeah, I mean, it's not good to take life seriously anyway, because none of us get out alive. And it's like you said before, nothing's predictable anyway. The future's always uncertain. And I think, like, one of the things that we do well is that we can think on our feet. And there's nothing wrong with that, at all. But it's about what's behind it, where it's coming from. And I know that, like, if I'm very stressed or I'm emotional or upset, that's not a good time to be making any decisions. and although as much as I want to, and it's like, no, let's wait until this has passed, and then we'll decide and see what needs to be done. And I think that we can certainly, the thoughts and that don't go away. And also what helps for me is feeling it in the body, because it always starts as a sensation. So once you can catch that sensation, then before it becomes a thought, and then the thought becomes an action, it's like you can stay with that sensation.
No, I did some really good work with Donna Lancaster, author of The Bridge.
Right.
And she used to run a psychological therapy retreat looking at childhood wounding with African, Buddhist, and some other ritual-based healing, as well as some science from the likes of Peter Levine and somatic experiencing and stuff. And she opened her introduction evening that I went to 4 or 5 years ago, with a very similar comment about people live in their heads. You know, it's all about the ego. It's all about thinking about what to do rather than feeling what's happening on. And the point of the retreat is to not only deal with your loss chart. Hey, get an A3 sheet of paper, draw a line on it, and then put down everything that you've ever lost. That's quite traumatic in itself. Thanks. And then, you know, working on, you know, the top 3 of those over 7 days, but also trying to build mindfulness practice, silence practice into that healing process. Yeah, it's not easy, and it's especially not easy for a man to do it. You know, when I did the Bridge retreat in 2019, I think it was their 10th or 12th retreat. 14 people on each retreat. I was something like their 3rd or 5th man. So out of 140 people, yeah, only a handful of men.
Oh, I see. Not just on your retreat, but out of
but
all
total.
retreats.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there was 2 guys on my retreat.
Yeah.
Phil, who was on the very first retreat. They made a documentary. What's the documentary called? It's something about love. I'll find the link and text it to you. Because basically they made a feature-length film that then got published on Amazon Prime, I think, about the retreat and about why they're doing the retreat. And Donna's friend Gabby and Donna running through the retreat. And essentially they had 14 people on the retreat. It might have been 10 for the recording. And the camera crew all in these little rooms where, you know, it was packed with, you know, 14 or 15 of us in the room, let alone people filming as well. At a lovely retreat centre in Somerset at 42 acres near Frome. But yeah, there's so much of the conversation of, well, you need to keep doing the work. You can't do a retreat and then forget about it. It's about continuing the practice, and just like GPs, they are still practicing. That thought of continual learning. But I tend to gel better with science and research than I do spirituality and feelings, and that might be my lived conditioning, because I had a traumatic childhood and I learned that feeling hurt. Well, how about I don't do that anymore? I cried yesterday for the first time in about 3 years. But yeah, it's just odd.
I know, because it's counterintuitive, because we think, oh yeah, like you said, feeling's bad, showing emotions is bad, it's a sign of weakness, and also because we don't want to feel like that. But of course, it's like anything, the more you suppress it, the more you push it away, it's just going to build up and build up, and then it's going to come out at some point, and that might be as a mental or emotional breakdown, or it might be a physical illness. But it's like and what's good as well is there is all the science to back it up now as well. It's like, they've done brain scans of people before and after meditation, and they see, so you've got the science behind it, which is what I like as well, is that the science is there. And I'm too late to start. I forgot where I was going with that.
No, that's exactly where we are with executive function disorder and working memory problems.
Yes.
Yeah, I recorded Matthew's session on Friday, and yeah, we had a good 10 or 15 minutes talking about working memory. All of those scenarios when you're meant to be somewhere else, but at the moment you don't know where that is, because you're hyper focused on something else, or you just forgot. Yeah, but did you actually forget, or is there something else drawing your attention?
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the analogy that my brain is like a spider's web, and every time a thread crosses a little node. So the problem with that is that it can seem like I'm going off piste, but in my brain it's definitely connected. I'm currently doing a diploma in coaching and mentoring, and my my master, my sensei, it's like, Richard, that's totally unrelated. And I was like, well, it's not in my head anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really quite difficult to grasp that sometimes. But the good thing is that I can normally have a conversation with anyone about anything, because at some point it will cross one of those nodes, and then I can join some dots.
Yes.
So yeah, it is tricky trying to think on your feet.
Oh, I know what it was sometimes.
Now. Go for it.
It was about feeling, wasn't it? About feeling your feelings, because eventually it's like the more you can feel into it, then it does get easier. And sometimes, I've had, again, probably a few breakdowns over the years, and one in particular was a year after my ex-husband died, and all the stuff came up because I hadn't dealt with it at the time of the divorce, because, well, I didn't know about any of this thing then. I've got 3 young kids to look after. It's like, okay, I thought, okay, now I'm divorced, that's fine. Nobody told you you've got to go through a grieving process, you've got to process your feelings. And at that point, I just couldn't stop it. I just think I cried almost non-stop for about 2 weeks. And when I went, well, obviously not when I was out, but when I was at home, and I just allowed it, because I knew that I had to let this out. I had to feel it. It was part of the healing process. And then people would say, oh, look, you look amazing, Helen. You look really well, even though I'm having shit time at the moment, actually. But that was because perhaps if I'd had been trying to suppress it and hold it all together, I would have looked haggard and stressed because I'm trying to contain it. And there's one of the first books I read on Buddhism's a Buddhist nun called Pema Chodron, called When Things Fall Apart. And it's about letting them fall apart, because then it's like so you can think of an analogies have a bird. It has to break the egg to get out, doesn't it? So it's like, and there's an African shaman who has written a book about the Western view of mental illness, and saying, well, really, and I see that now in my own process. It's like, if I think I'm having this breakdown or I'm struggling with my mental health, it's actually a period of growth there. There's something is shifting, something is changing, and then you can change your relationship with it and how this is working. And so many things like natural human feelings and emotions have just become pathologized, even like ADHD. I think we talked about that before, and it's like, oh, we've got to give them some pills to make them normal, instead of just allowing people to be who they are. And if somebody's depressed, it's like, well, what's behind that? I mean, I've read quite a bit of stuff on trauma as well, and there's a good book called It Didn't Start With You. And now I think so much with all this mental health is because it's just being passed on from generation to generation without
hereditary wounding. Yeah.
And suddenly all these people, it's like been heaped on them, and suddenly it's like it's got to come out. And now we're the ones who are having to deal with that. And I saw something you said, trauma isn't your fault, but healing is your responsibility, because if we don't, we just perpetuate the cycle.
No, that is so true. Now my brain was going somewhere else, but that's not a helpful way to go, talking about connecting threads. Let's not. Well, yeah, but it might be interesting. So there was some research done in rodents about not necessarily testing hereditary trauma. It was more about hereditary bias. And basically they put a family of rats in a cage with two water troughs. One water trough they laced with cocaine.
Oh yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And one they didn't. And it's the piece of research to say that actually over time they removed the drug, but the family kept drinking from the same water fountain and never from the other fountain. So even I think it was 10 or 15 generations later, the family still shunned the other water fountain.
Yeah.
And my nodes in my head have a whole piece there about in and out groups and how difference can also be hereditary. Or our response to difference can be hereditary. Because if your parents think that being gay is weird, then you might think being gay is weird until you educate yourself that it's okay, etc., etc.
I have that theory as well. It's why we won't get too political, but why people vote Conservative when they don't. Yeah, it's like, well, because that's what their parents did. Well, not just Conservative, any party really, because they don't think about what this party stands for. It's just like, oh well, it's that same kind of thing, isn't it?
Well, I live in a Conservative safe seat. I don't think anyone but the Conservatives have been in here for like 150 years. In I think it was the 2017 election. Was there an election? It was after the Brexit referendum.
Yeah.
It might have been just before. It was 2013. Anyway, in one of the elections, I looked at all of the non-voters, all of the other party votes versus the Conservative vote. If everybody who didn't vote Conservative voted for the next best party, Conservatives would still have won.
Yeah.
So, and then you ask yourself, why? Okay, well, I live in a leafy village 5 miles out of Cambridge, and the average age is probably about 60. The average house price is about £700,000. I wonder why these people are voting Conservative, which isn't necessarily, the best thing for the country. So, I didn't vote at all until the Brexit referendum and felt compelled to. And then I voted in every election since. Yeah. And the conversation about voting in general elections is, okay, well, who's the least worst party? Because none of them really stand out as, the shining beacon of hope. And the most recent leadership contest for the Conservative Party absolutely shows the best that we can put forward.
Yeah. I mean, I went through a few years when I didn't vote, not where I live now, but it's similar along here on the South Coast. Tory safe seats, although the councils are changing.
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, although the system's not perfect, women died to fight for the right to vote. So I think,
it would only be the right and proper thing to do to, exercise that right.
Yeah. So also it's showing that we're all different, and I think it's about learning to work together. And I think what's a good thing about the neurodiversity movement now, and people realizing that it's okay to be different. We're all different anyway, and we don't all need to be the same to work together. We can find, like we said before, in a community, or ideally, I suppose, in a business where you've got several employees, that everybody's, there's the Belbin team thing as well, isn't there? That when you've got all these different people at the team with all the different strengths, then you've got the best team, instead of everybody having to be the same. Because we did that when I was teaching, and not long after I'd qualified, and I came out as the creative one, and because my subject's maths, the rest of them were sort of like looking at me, well, we teach maths, how can we be creative as well? Of course you've got to be creative, you have to create lessons and things like that to make it interesting. But anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah. Dr. Meredith lives in the next village, and Belbin's global head office is in this village.
Oh, okay.
And they have just reconstituted themselves as an employee cooperative.
Oh.
So the employees benefit from the company.
Yeah.
And I think that's some legacy stuff from Meredith, because he's in his 90s now.
Right.
And he needs to leave the organization in a state to continue. But no, I absolutely get the mantra behind we don't need well-rounded people, we need well-rounded communities.
Yeah.
What bits are we lacking in this group of people, so we can go and find those skills to make us better working together.
Yeah.
So we've only got a few more minutes left of our time together. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on?
I don't think so. It's been pretty comprehensive, really. But yeah, so I just think that going back to obviously my passion, which is meditation, I think I would just say to people to try it, and also to get a teacher. Because the problem is, I suppose now there's so much, it's like anything, isn't there? There's so much information out there on the internet and stuff, and apps and things like that. And I always say, well, I use an app. I use Insight Timer, which is great for people with ADHD because it gives you stars. If you meditate for 10 days, you get a star. And if you miss a day, then you have to go back to day one. So that kind of keeps me motivated. But I mean, there are guided meditations on there, but you can't learn from an app. You need it's good then to support your practice like it does with me. But even though, like last week, I wasn't really taking part in the retreat because I was cooking, but there's still things that you pick up and you take away. And that's the other thing as well that I've learned. At the beginning, I'd write loads of notes and try and remember it all. And I'm thinking, this is silly. You're never going to remember it all. Just pick one thing and work with that. And I think, and that's something that I'm really quite, I don't like to use the word strict, but another word will. It's like not trying to do everything and having more boundaries around what I say yes to and what I say no to, because that impulsivity can mean I'd say yes to all these things and then I get overwhelmed. And I think I did that earlier this year. I thought, right, I'm going to make, and this is quite a useful exercise anybody could do, is think what's important in your life, and like making a mandala, a circle, and then in the middle of that is the things that are most important. And then it just, because I suppose we don't tend to think in linear ways anyway, it just helps me realize what my values are, and then I can come back to that if I feel like I'm veering away from that. Is this in alignment with my values? And it's really interesting. And since I've done that, well, like I said last year, I was one of the things that led to diagnosis was the inconsistency and difficulty sort of maintaining a business and getting clients. But I get almost every day from LinkedIn, I'm mostly getting inquiries. Even though I was away last week, and I got on Friday, there was one there was a message. So, and I think it's about being authentic with, and people will pick up on that, And I think, I read in one of the books, it's like we have excellent BS detectors, and we can tell when people aren't being fully authentic. And I think, even if you don't know it on a conscious level, unconsciously, people will pick up on that energy anyway, if you're not in alignment. And I realized, perhaps, although I thought, I did want to do all the things, but perhaps it wasn't the best thing for me. And because there were so many people, I think, well, I could work with teachers, I could work with women who've been in abusive relationships, and I could work with people who've got sons who are drug addicts. But then I thought, well, with ADHD, you're going to get people with ADHD who are those things as well. So it's like having that. So I thought, with that focus with the ADHD, and I think going through the process last year, like we said, the grieving, but also it's having this gratitude that, okay, I've been through this, it wasn't nice, but it's given me more empathy and more compassion because I've been there to support other people.
I completely get it. Matt Gutwell posted on LinkedIn last week about the holy trinity of knowledge, life experience, and lived experience.
Yeah.
And that chimes with me because, in any facilitation you do, be that coaching or guided meditation or teaching, you take yourself with you.
Yeah.
And yeah, the older and wiser you get, the more that informs your practice. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that angle.
Yeah, definitely. And that was, once I started to learn to meditate and had coaching and that kind of thing, it was sort of going on that personal development journey. It was thinking, why wasn't I taught this when I did my teacher training? It was like with when I did my coach training, it's very much that, bringing you're bringing yourself. How are you showing up? You know, what thoughts are going on? What are your beliefs about the person you're coaching? And so I used to then bring that into my teaching. It's like if I was making judgments or having thoughts about the kids, it's like, oh, where did that come from? Let that go. Let's see all these children, regardless of what they're doing, behavior is just behavior. It's not good or bad. It's just a symptom of what's going on. It's like if you see them all as shiny, amazing beings with unlimited potential, then it changes without me having to do anything. You know, if I could sort of like, okay, catch my beliefs, let go of them, and then the energy in the room would change.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know, you try telling that to most teachers, they think you're bonkers, but you know, but then everybody's like on their own journey. And at first I was like, you know, teachers need to know this and need to know this. And then I realized, well, it's like, because although it seems obvious to me, it's not to them, and they've got to go through their own process and their own journey. And that's, you know, when they want that, or if they're ready. I think that's hard as a coach, because you can see, oh, everybody will benefit from coaching, but then it's like they've got to be coachable, and also what people need is very different to what they want.
So, you know, my training is needs-based behaviors and dispute resolution. Well, behavioral change only happens when people want to change. I'm currently doing some work on dispute resolution in the ND space, because wanting to change and being able to change aren't the same thing.
No.
So how can you support NDers to rebuild difficult relationships if they're unable to change their behavior? So that's a whole thought process that's ongoing. Anyway, Helen, it's been lovely having you on.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And hopefully we can catch up again soon.